Hello, hello, Ederson Oliveira here. This is the first interview with a presenter of the next DNN Summit, and I have with me Jeff McWherter. I hope that I got this right, Jeff. Thank you very much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing great, doing great. It's a very, very interesting date today for you guys in the US. I know that you have elections there, so I hope that everything goes fine. Yeah, hope you guys the best there. In any case, let's
thank you very much. It's exciting.
I know. Yeah, let's leave it at that. No, let's leave it at that.
Good idea.
Okay, so Jeff, just a brief intro. I'm gonna ask him to intro himself, but just a brief intro here. Jeff is the owner of GravityWorks Design, and you can find gravityworksdesign.com. He is a developer himself, an entrepreneur, a book author, and a lot of stuff. So the title of his presentation on the DNN Summit is Planning for Accessibility. So, Jeff, my first question is, why accessibility?
Why accessibility? It's extremely important for sure. Everybody does not use computers and internet and the web exactly the same way. Folks could have vision disabilities, cognitive disabilities, motor disabilities, and there's a large percentage of the population that many designers, developers, front-end developers, back-end developers, they forget about these audiences a lot of times. And a lot of the stuff that we do to make websites and applications and everything accessible it's just a matter of knowing, and once you have the knowledge in your tool belt, it's not anything additional. So it's education for sure. I like to promote that, and I'm just passionate about the subject.
Okay, so I guess that I jumped too quick to the main point of our conversation today. So let's step back a little bit for a second and maybe talk a little bit about your background, why you are, I would say, well positioned to talk about that topic. Talk a little bit about that and unpack that.
Sure. So I have been a software developer for over 20 years now, and the world has changed, and my career has changed. So I started off as a back-end programmer in the early days of the web, going back 1996, 95, working on the web, and I was around for the big .com boom and seeing how the internet worked. And my career progressively moved up. I was working as a back-end developer, moved into managing a team of developers, and then I took a career shift and I started working at a startup. They were a consulting startup, so they were providing websites and mobile apps. Actually, it was right when mobile apps were coming out, but I was pushing them to do mobile apps. But it was a little bit of a difference. It was a change, but I was still doing a lot of the work. So then I started GravityWorks, and when you start a company, you wear all of the hats, especially in the early days. You do accounting, you do billing, you do HR issues, you do the front-end development, you do back-end development. And I was working really hard to build the company, and through some really great hires, was able to build the company and get it where it is today, which is 15 developers, content entry people, project management, designers, and each hire takes a little sliver away from me with what I'm doing. I've been able to transition my role, and my real role now is, I guess, Chief Distraction Officer. So I'm able to walk over to people, say, hey, what you working on? And I can spend the time with them and look to see exactly what they're working on. So although my career has taken many turns with being a software developer, a back-end developer, front-end developer, manager, to a business owner, one of those things that has been my key driving force has been education. And through education, there's some key topics that I like to talk about. And one of those is accessibility. One of the books that I wrote, Testing for the Web, many years ago, had a couple chapters devoted specifically to accessibility, because again, even back then, I thought it was an afterthought, as I do today. So accessibility and accessibility trends and techniques are constantly evolving, so it's extremely important in our organization, Gravity Works, that we have these conversations, and when we hire new people, that they're aware of the challenges that disabled folks present.
Got it. Okay. So in the topic of accessibility, I just want to understand whether or not that's actually a key part of any project that you in your organization develop, or this is more of, hey, this client requires that, and then we're gonna do that for them. So is that company wide, or is that project specific for you in your organization?
It's company wide for sure. With accessibilities, there's a whole bunch of different standards that you could follow. Many states have their own standards here in the United States. Many industries have their own standards, and then the web has their own, the WCAG, and the WCAG has different levels as well. And the different levels really mean how deep involved it supports for accessibility. For example, the highest level of WCAG, if you have video on your website, you need to have speech bubbles with somebody using sign language to present the text that is being played in there. Now, we don't go to that extreme on all of our sites. We don't make them all AAA compliant unless there's a requirement for, but we do the best practices. All of our designs run through tools to check contrast to make sure the text that is being presented on the page, folks with vision disabilities can read it correctly. So any forms that we are creating, JavaScript that we're using, doing is all area compliant, having the new area tags in there. And it is important for us. And honestly, it just becomes part of the process that it's not just a checklist at the end of a project that we say, yes, we did this, yes, we did this. So when a project does require some strict guidelines, we work with a lot of transportation agencies where you have to go to AA compliance. It's not really a big deal for us. It's just making sure that we're hitting some of the more stricter rules.
Got it. Okay, so when a few years ago that I was very involved on some large developments on DNN, and it used to be a problem to have DNN complying with certain standards because of the way things were, built. The code was built on DNN. My question to you is that still an issue for you, or DNN is over that already?
I think that there, especially in the administration tools, there's still some issues that we have to get exceptions for, and that's the thing with some of these bigger standards is identifying the problems and having exceptions for them, knowing what the issues are and having a reason why you didn't comply with them are important. The front ends of the sites, the public interfaces, the login areas, just not the DNN administration area, we have had no problem doing any accessibility that we need to do with it. The login controls, anything that we need to do, the framework is in place for us to do our job correctly.
Got it. Okay. So when I hear about accessibility, I think about a checklist. It needs to do this, and that. But without going into too much of the content that you're gonna be talking through your session, I just wanted to know if there are a few tools out there that you can say, hey, check my website against this standard and tell me if what I'm missing there, if I'm missing anything obvious, or if there is anything that I'm missing according to certain standards. Is there a tool like that out there?
Sure, there's lots of websites that you can use to validate a checklist for sure. They'll run through to make sure that you have alt text on your images, so screen readers are able to read them, read what the images are. and other of the checklist type items. But when it comes down to accessibility, it really comes down to perspective of somebody who has a disability. For example, somebody who has a motor disability in their right hand, maybe lost 80-90% of their right hand, are they able to use your website? So it's important to know the rules and know how people are using your website and how it is expected. So not just running through a checklist, actually using a screen reader, running the website through a screen reader to see, okay, yes, it complies to this checklist of items, but I just ran it through a screen reader and the content is so garbled together and there's run-on sentences that if I clean this up a little bit, it's going to make it easier for their experience. So yes, I mean, I think there's lots of good tools out there. A quick Google search will go through and return a whole slew of these types of tools, but it really comes down to knowing the rules and how to test for them correctly.
Okay. Now, I can only imagine that if you take into account accessibility, you are building, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might be way off here, but you are building a bit of an overhead on your processes there. I mean, I guess that once it gets into the process of your team, of your development, then it becomes better. But is that true that you add some overhead in development when you are taking a lot of accessibility aspects into account?
Sure. So in the beginning, absolutely. I guess you can relate this to responsive design. When responsive design came around, there was a great deal of time in the beginning learning how to make elements respond down to the different devices, whether it's a tablet or a mobile phone. And then after the developers are experienced in this, they can look at maybe somebody gives them a desktop design and they're already, the gears are turning in their head as how they're going to make it respond. The same comes into accessibility. Our front-end developers get a design, and it's a team process. So our creative director and the folks doing the designs, they know how to make accessible designs based on contrast issues and making sure the texts are spaced out enough. And they're doing their part, so then the front-end developer gets it, and they'll say, oh, it looks like there's a form here. I need to make sure I do this, this, and this. Then the back-end developer gets it. The folks in our office who are doing maybe some Angular or Ember, they look at it and say, oh, we need to add these area tags because of this reason and this reason. So I think yes, and depending on the organization, there is overhead in the beginning, but once you get through the initial grunt of learning, tables are evil for most things. I think most people know that nowadays, except for tabular data. Once you get over those hurdles through lunch and learns or going to talks and hearing people talk about it, and you part it in your process, it's not really that big of an overhead. Part of our process when we launch a site is we'll run it through some of those tools online to check to make sure that you hit the majority of the thing. Does it pass the contrast issues and stuff? And the longer we do this, the less and less issues that you see. You still see them, but then it just gets back into QA. So, I mean, developing websites are complicated now. You have to do accessibility, you have to do responsive testing, and then you have cross-browser testing, which you've had forever. But, it's just another thing that we add to the process. And again, if a lot of the techniques that you do to create responsive websites, a truly responsive website, help you creating an accessible website as well.
Got it. I think a very related question to the last one, and it's pretty much my last one specifically about accessibility, is aside from the obvious benefit to whoever has some sort of limitation or in the fact that the company that does that becomes a good citizen, I mean, it's just a good practice as well. How else do you sell or do you convince someone or an organization to buy into accessibility? What else? Because whenever a business decision is in place, there is usually what is the benefit here? So again, besides just being a good citizen, what else is a good argument to sell accessibility to an organization?
Sure, and I think a lot of times it's not a matter of selling it. I think it's just a matter of it's part of the process. You don't go into a company and sell version control. You just use version control because it's a good process. You know you have to do it. That might not be the best example because using DNN, it's a content management system, so the folks after you develop this truly accessible website, it's awesome, it's great, you have to turn it over to the client at some point. And when the client gets it, if they're not following those rules, then all that work that you did is for naught, because you're going to get a lot of accessibility issues because they're not trained up on it. So I think that comes just down to good training. You can mention, this is why we do this is why we do this particular practice, this is how you enter content, and it comes down to making sure that the clients are trained up in those practices as well. Again, I think it's bigger organizations, government organizations, it's a checklist. You have to do this, and that's why you see it a lot of times, but it really needs to be behind the covers. It needs to be ingrained into people's process because it's not creating that much overhead in there. And then the talking of it just goes away. Yes, it's important, but everybody follows these practices, so we're set and we're good. And that's kind of how it happened in our office here. Every once in a while, we'll get a good article coming out about accessibility, or if we're ramping up to work with somebody who has some really strict accessibility requirements, it'll be a hot topic in our office again for a while. But for the most part, it's just part of our process. We check things into version control. We write accessible front-end code.
Perfect. Great. That's a great answer. So my last question is this, Jeff. What is the one thing that you like people that attend to your session that they leave with? What is the one thing that you want, that you like to?
I guess one line is accessibility is not a barrier to innovation. I think a lot of folks think that there's all these complex rules about accessibility and there's a lot of overhead to it, so it's better not to even deal with it than get into it. I would like people to learn, leaving with a plan, knowing what they need to do, knowing how to take these patterns into their organizations on how to write better code, write accessible code, and think about the audiences, some of these audience types that they're not thinking of. The folks that have cognitive disabilities, the folks who have learning disabilities, who have difficulty reading at a 5th grade level. Where are those audience types thought about in the sites that you're developing? So I think folks leaving should have a plan and get the gears turning on where to go next in some of the websites they work on.
Perfect. Anything that we haven't covered, Jeff, that you think it's you still want to put out there? Anything in particular?
No, I think we covered a great deal over this call. I think that I'm excited to give this talk. I think folks are going to learn a great deal. I really want folks to come out of there having a plan, and I just hope that they get a lot of good information for them to take back to their organizations and get the gears turning in their head on how to make accessible websites.
Perfect. Okay, so Jeff, thank you very much for being the first one on these talks, these sessions, and I hope to see you in person, face-to-face there on DNN Summit. Thank you very much for your time here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Bye.